Hello, 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 everyone, and happy Thursday. Hope you guys are all having a great day, and thank you again for joining us for another fantastic episode of Let's Talk About Shh. For everybody joining us for the very first time, Let's Talk About Shh is a live podcast where we talk about love, intimacy, and relationships, and pretty much anything and everything related to that. So, who am I? My name is Tila. I'm a sex educator and relationship expert and published author. I have been doing sex ed for quite a long time, and I love helping people connect with that part of themselves. In so many places, sexuality is something that we can't talk about and that is taboo, and people feel really embarrassed about. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about talking about sex. It's great to talk about, it's great to learn about, and the more we learn about it, the better sex we have, the better relationships we have. So, today's episode is all about being an ally. And I love it when people comment. I love it when people call in and give their thoughts and their stories and ask questions. And we want it to be a nice, safe, and inviting environment for everybody. So the comments do show up on the video feed. So if you're going to comment, just a couple of helpful reminders. Don't make people feel bad about asking questions. We want people to ask questions. Don't make people feel bad about, being part of the conversation. We want to create a nice, fun community where it is awesome to hang out. So I'm going to open up the phone lines now. So today we are going to be talking about being an ally, which is a super important topic all of the time, but it probably feels a little bit more relevant to what's happening in the world today. And we're going to talk about it in a little bit more of a general sense, so that, there's lots of different ways and communities that need allies, and allyship could be multi-layered. It doesn't have to be just one thing. So we're going to get into that a little bit. So for those of you just joining us for the first time, let's just see a comment. What is privacy? What is privacy in regards to what? This is a live broadcast, so if you're sharing your comments or thoughts, it is going out live, and people will see it and hear it. As in terms of calling in for privacy, you don't have to say where you're calling from. It's nice if you give callers your name, but you don't have to give callers your real name either. Any personal information you choose to disclose is entirely up to you. So it's as much as you want or as little as you want, and that's okay. Your consent's very important. But yeah, if you do want to call in with a question or a comment or a thought or a story, our lines are open at 1-877-777-5589. So I hope everybody is doing well today. Just checking to make sure all of our feeds are active, which it does appear they are, so that's great. So without much further ado, let's start talking about being an ally. So what does it mean to be an ally? And this word is sort of thrown around a lot, and I kind of want to talk about it in a couple of different ways today. And the first thing that I think we should sort of establish is, what does it mean to be an ally? And that basically means that you're willing to take someone else's struggle on as your own. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you completely understand or have a detailed knowledge of what that struggle feels like on a day-to-day basis, but it basically means that you're willing to stand up and take a stand, even if you're feeling scared, even if it may be, I don't want to say detrimental, but in some cases it can be. Why people say that sex talk is private. People generally feel embarrassed talking about sex because of various cultural reasons. Lots of societies sort of make it kind of hush-hush. Even in North America, where we use sex very blatant in advertising, sexuality is still it's not considered polite conversation, and many people, when they're asking questions about sexuality, are often told to not ask those questions. So that's sort of contributed to the idea of that, talking about sex is a very private matter, but it doesn't have to be. I hope that answered your question. Anyway, so talking about allyship, so you're being an ally is all about taking on that struggle as if it's your own, right? Making it personal, not necessarily making it personal as in personal, but, you know, assigning yourself to a cause, right? So a big thing about this is that people who are allies have the benefit of taking whatever privilege they have and providing that protection of privilege to people who don't have the same privilege. So it's sort of, allyship is also a big piece of that, is acknowledging that while you too may understand and in some cases feel the pain that someone else may be going through, the conversation is not about you. It's about the struggle that this person who has less privilege than you experiences on a day-to-day basis. Hey, Amanda. Thanks for checking in and commenting. Yeah, everybody, please comment, share, subscribe. Sharing is caring. If you find this podcast valuable, hit the like button, hit the watch button, hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever platform you're watching it on. It's a big help. So sort of recap this concept of being an ally. Is, like I said, you don't need to necessarily fully understand what it feels like to be oppressed, but it means that you're taking on the struggle to find out, and you're taking on the struggle to make a change. So anybody has the potential to be an ally. Anybody can be an ally. And allies recognize that though they may not be part of that oppressed group, they can support it. And they can make an effort to understand the struggle that a minority may face on a daily basis. And because allies often have more privilege than the minority groups that they're working with, they can use that privilege for the benefit of those minority groups. Their voices can be quite powerful to those who would not listen to someone from a minority group. So there's a couple things to be aware of when you're talking about being an ally or thinking about being an ally or wanting to be an ally. And like with so many other things, not everybody knows how to be an ally, and that's okay. It's a learning curve. Lots of people are on different journeys with their knowledge about different struggles or different subcultures or different minorities. So if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I'd love to do something, but I don't know what, or I don't know where to start, we're just going to cover a couple of things to just be aware of if you want to step up and be an ally. So a big important thing is to listen. I know that you probably have heard that a lot. But strangely enough, despite how much we talk about people listening, people still are not listening enough, or they think they know better, or they think that they've read a couple of books or a couple of studies, or had this one friend, so they know everything that there ever could possibly be about this struggle, and they stop listening, or they can't get over their pride and they don't listen. So listening is really key. The thing is about minorities is that their voice has been squashed, okay, in many cases. That's what oppression does, is it silences people. And so being an ally, something very powerful you can do is to hold space for someone else to talk and share their story. And it's the knowledge of knowing when it's appropriate to do that and when it's appropriate to not be silent. So part of this also means that you have to be aware of your own biases. Now, we all grow up with biases. There's nothing to be ashamed about that. It depends on our life experiences. It depends on, what we've learned, what we haven't learned. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you don't know enough about something, or that you haven't had the experience about learning about something, The shame comes in where you acknowledge that but don't make an effort to change. Where it's, I don't know enough about this, but I'm not going to do anything to remedy that, or I'm not going to do anything to make a difference, or I'm not going to do anything to be an ally or learn more about this or even listen. So it's okay to have those biases, but being aware of them is an important step, and being able to challenge them. I know many people feel that things that they grew up with are comfortable and familiar, and it gives us this sort of nostalgia when we have certain traditions. That's why traditions are so powerful, right? It reminds us of a time where things were simpler, where things felt safe. It sort of tells us what to do. And a lot of traditions can have implicit biases in them that contribute to oppression. And we have to acknowledge that and challenge them. It doesn't mean that every tradition is bad or awful or has to be dismantled, but we do have to examine what biases are contained in those traditions and how are those things contributing to oppression, and are we perpetuating oppression? So doing the research on this sort of stuff is important. Learning about the history of a struggle that you're participating in or that you're actively learning more about, like learn the history, learn everything you can about it, and as uncomfortable as it may be, inner growth is often about acknowledging ways that we may have wronged other people, or ways that we may have participated in oppressive systems, or in some cases oppressed someone else, whether it was intentionally or unintentionally. Most people, I think I said this earlier this week already, but most people don't think of themselves as bad people. Everybody thinks of themselves as good people, generally speaking, and we work really hard to keep that perception of ourselves, and for obvious reasons. There's nothing wrong with thinking of yourself as a good person, but it does mean that we tend to justify certain actions, and we don't really look at where we're wrong. Admitting that we're wrong can be super hard, and admitting that we have participated in the oppression of someone else is really uncomfortable. But it's important for that oppression to end, because if we don't learn about that and we don't examine that, all we're doing is perpetuating it. So once you've sort of figured out how you are contributing, you can look at how we can change oppressive systems. How can we do things differently? And that's a big part of being an ally. How can we do things differently? How can someone of a privileged class hold space and make changes that move us closer towards equality? So a big piece of all of that I just sort of talked about is being able to listen and accept criticism with grace, which is often uncomfortable and is so difficult to do all the time. Many of us have struggled with accepting criticism. Also, lots of people aren't very good at giving criticism. And sometimes, we're not ready to hear it. And if somebody else is understandably and justifiably angry, they are under no obligation to spare our feelings, to explain it in a way that, is constructive. I don't think it's the responsibility of minorities to do that. It's the responsibility of those who have privilege to be more understanding, to take the time to listen, and to try to take the criticism, constructive and otherwise, with grace, which is not easy, but it's important. It's important that we listen to those voices and hear what they have to say, even when it's unpleasant, especially when it's unpleasant, actually, because that's where we can do the most work and the most good. I know I'm kind of flying through this a little fast. How's everybody feeling? We still with me? You guys have any thoughts or comments so far? thought yet? Okay. So part of listening and knowing when to speak is understanding how much space you take up and what kind of space you're in. Are you in a space that is mostly dominated by a privileged class? Are you in the space that is mostly a minority group, right? Understanding your space and understanding how much space you take up in it, if that makes sense, makes a big difference, because that's going to give you some cues as to whether or not you should speak up or stay silent. And that context is pretty important because we need to do both as a good ally. Because speaking up against injustice and discrimination is incredibly important. And so is listening. So understanding the context of when to do each of those things is pretty important. Typically, we want to, if minority groups are speaking, we want to be listening, of course. If somebody is in a room where it's mostly privileged people and maybe it's privileged people who don't understand their privilege and are sort of talking about the same issues, it might be a good idea. That's a perfect opportunity to be the voice of an ally and to speak up. Because in so many situations, many people choose to remain silent. And silence favors the oppressors. Let me say that again. Silence favors oppressors. It is an implicit approval of what they are saying and what they're doing when we don't speak out against them. And I understand that in some circumstances, it is not always safe for us to do that. But it is important when we feel we can. And I would never encourage anyone to dramatically jeopardize their own safety. If you're in physical danger, yeah, you know what, do what you need to do to get out of there. But if you're in a space where that's reasonably safe, if you're hanging out with your buddies and they're saying some stuff that, isn't gelling and, sounds kind of contributing to oppression, say something, speak up. If they're your friends, speak up. They should be listening to you too, right? And if you're afraid to speak up among your friends, it might be a good idea to ask yourself why. Why, if they feel this way and you feel so differently and you're afraid of voicing that, why are you friends with them? What makes them good people to be around? Are they the kind of people you want to be around? So there's a couple things that we should be aware of as allies to not do. We covered some do's, so let's cover some let's don't do that, or let's not do that. So a big thing is, as an ally, you shouldn't expect to be taught or shown. Okay? Take it upon yourself to learn the history, to learn what tools you have at your disposal, and to answer your own questions. It's not up to minority groups to do emotional labor for you. There are some people who are going to be okay with it, and that's all right. I'll use myself as an example. I often speak up against oppression against women and oppression against people who are LGBTQ, and in some cases, oppression against men. So I do a lot of emotional labor educating other people because I think that that's very important. And as an educator, I feel that it is part of my role. Not everyone will feel that way, so you should never expect it. Don't expect to be taught or shown, okay? The other thing is, don't try to compete in, who has it worse game, okay? This is not a game of whose struggle is worse, who's had it the worst. That's not helpful. I know people sort of try to make other people feel better often by being like, oh, well, it could be worse because this, this situation isn't so bad because it could be worse. And a lot of the times when we're talking to someone who is part of an oppressed minority, saying that is not helpful. It can actually feel really dismissive. So we don't want people to feel like their concerns are dismissed or that their concerns are not valid. They are valid. And it doesn't matter if somebody else has had it worse. What we should be addressing is the topic that's in front of us, not, playing it off by saying, oh, well, this is worse, so you should just suck it up. I mean, that's basically just ignoring the problem. It's not going to help anybody. It's not going to make anybody feel better. You're not ending oppression. You're mostly contributing to it, I hate to say. So, if somebody's talking about, something they're struggling with, there is no need to chime in with, hey, it could be worse. This is worse. We don't need that. Okay? So just don't. I sort of talked about this a little bit earlier, but don't think that you know what's best. Do not assume that you are the end all be all of ending oppression. Lots of people have lots of different ideas, and the more that we talk about these ideas and the more that we're open to how other people address the ideas, the more we're actually going to come closer to finding a real solution. Also, it can be really dismissive, especially if you're a person who has privilege over someone else in a conversation, that, if you're just like, well, I know best. You may live this, but I've done all this internal work and research, and I know that, this is best. I know how to treat your oppression. I mean, nobody would like being talked to that way, so please don't talk to people that way. Don't take credit for the labor of those who are marginalized, who did the work before you stepped in. In many cases, lots of oppressed communities have had a journey. We still have a ways to go towards equality. We're not, unfortunately, anywhere near that, I think. But a lot of people have contributed and a lot of people have added to the conversation, and don't discount what other people have done. Don't take credit for it. Join the fight. The fight is not about you. This is not a crusade that you are fighting. It may be, but even still, it's not about you. It's about the cause. Okay? And then, we sort of touched on this already too, but don't minimize somebody's struggle. When we're talking about LGBTQ, sometimes people, in an effort to be helpful or comforting, will say something like, well, I don't really think of you as gay. You're just a person to me. I don't really think about that. And that can be actually pretty demoralizing for someone, because it's sort of dismissive of the struggle, and it's also dismissive of their identity. So don't minimize somebody's struggle. Don't, try and take it away by saying, well, I don't really think of it like that. It's sort of a way of saying that you're not really interested in hearing about it, and you're not really interested in doing anything to be part of the solution. Does that make sense? How are we doing, everybody? This is a heavy topic, but it's so important, especially with everything that's happening today. Any thoughts or comments so far about being an ally, or a story you want to share? It's, you can sort of think about being an ally as being like a dancing partner. So, the expression, it takes two to tango. Well, imagine that you're dancing with somebody, and, you can think of your privilege like either some heavy boots, or maybe, the steps, the type of dance that you're doing. And if you're constantly stepping on somebody's toes, that hurts, right? So you can think about your privilege as, a heavy pair of shoes that kind of can sometimes obstruct you feeling like you're stepping on somebody's feet, but you are still stepping on their feet. They're going to feel it even if you don't. So I kind of like this analogy because it can make it a little bit easier to address some very abstract concepts of privilege and oppression. So if we think about stepping on somebody's toes, you know, there's a lot of common responses, and you know, somebody somebody may feel like if somebody says, oh, okay, well, I feel like that's really oppressive, or I feel like this is dismissing my concerns, you know, you can think about it like, instead of responding like, I'm not oppressing you, that would be like saying, well, I can't believe you think I stepped on your toes. Well, you did, even if you didn't feel it, right? So it's sort of a way that we can think about privilege and talk about privilege, you know. And other people might deny other experiences that are different from their own. You know, you could say, well, I don't mind when people step on my toes. Okay, well, those are your toes. You know, this person clearly minds that their toes are being stepped on, so maybe don't step on their toes. You know, you're dancing, you want it to be fun, right? Don't step on other people's toes. You know, another common response is like sort of a derailing response. So, you know, in our toe example, it could be something like, you know, some people don't even have toes, so why can't we be talking about them instead? You know, like if I was dancing with you and you didn't have toes, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Seems really silly, right? You know, we could always think about it like in tone policing. You know, like, well, maybe I'd move my foot if you just asked me more nicely. Maybe I just wouldn't step on your toes if you asked me nicely. Have you thought about that? You know, stuff like that. When we put it in a different context, it sounds really silly, right? Like, you would never do that to somebody you're dancing with. If you stepped on somebody's toes and they were like, ow, you stepped on my toes, you'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Right? So it's the same sort of thing with privilege. We don't always know we're doing it. We don't always think about it. And our experience may be different, but there's different ways that we can address it to make people more comfortable. So, you know, like I said, are you okay? Say you're sorry. Move your feet, you know? So yeah, I kind of like that metaphor just for that reason. It makes it a little bit easier to understand. I don't know how everybody's feeling about that. Amanda is just commenting, all good here. I met a pansexual today and we bonded over our favorite band. I didn't know what an ally was at first, but super important. It's a great comment. Thank you for sharing that story. That's great. I was going to talk a little bit more about do's and don'ts of allies, but we're starting, it's a little bit later than I thought it was. So I want to talk about some myths, because I think that's also really important as well, is a lot of people have this conception of what an ally is, and I sort of want to address some of those myths. So a myth that comes up a lot is an ally is just a great person with the right views. So, you know, this is sort of the idea that, I mean, the reality is an ally is somebody who does the right things that help people who need it. It's not about always having the right views or being a good person. Allyship is really about action. You know, it's not about views. It's about what actions are you taking? How are you responding to the situation? You know, it's not so much as an identity as an action, right? If you weren't a good ally before, you can still be a good ally by taking action, right? So your allyship does depend on whether or not you continue to take action. If you say we're a fantastic ally 20 years ago, that doesn't mean that you're a fantastic ally today. You know, it's about that continual effort, that continual action. And it's not a label that you just get to enjoy. Another big myth is that allies deserve praise. And while it can feel good to thank someone who's helped us or thank someone who's addressed a problem, you know, an ally is somebody who is repairing injustice that has happened through support and speaking up. And an ally realistically doesn't deserve praise for this, because this should be more of a baseline. You know, when we go out of our way to praise people who are allies, I mean, a lot of people do this because unfortunately there are not a lot of strong allies for different communities. So it can be sort of a novel thing, and we want to encourage other people to be allies, so we praise them like, oh, look at this person, they did this amazing thing for this community. And that can make people feel good, but it's not an automatic, like, allies deserve praise. That's kind of like being like, oh my god, you're a decent human being that respected the rights of others. Woo! Like, that should be a baseline. We should be respecting people. And it shouldn't be something that's extraordinary, So it's kind of a tricky thing. I understand people's need to want to praise allies, but like I said, you're basically praising somebody for being a decent human being. We should really be looking at raising the bar of what that means. There is some arguments that, by offering allies too much praise, are we really just continuing to contribute because, we're sort of lowering the bar, right? There's a lot of different ways that argument could go, but, it's not that allies can never be praised. It's not a default, it's not a requirement. Minorities should not be so grateful that they have an ally that they trip over themselves to praise that person. That's not how it works. And it's not how it should work, if that makes sense. Another myth is that allies never get praised, like ever. Lots of people who contribute to allyship do get praised. And oftentimes, especially if it's a celebrity or a large company, that praise is often quite public. If you are in a situation where you are an ally and you're receiving praise, it's okay to say thank you and just keep working at being an ally. It doesn't make you a bad ally to get praised. Doesn't make you a particularly good ally to get praised. It's just sort of where people are at and how people are feeling about it. But if you are an ally who receives praise, just say thank you and move on. And just remember what the focus is, that we're trying to eliminate oppression and that we're standing up for what's right. Another really big one is that allies never make mistakes. And that is absolutely impossible. Everybody is on their own journey, learning about things, learning about being an ally and how to be a good ally and how to work with people. And being an ally is all about action, taking action, taking a stand, doing something. And with action comes imperfection. Sometimes people will not respond to the situation correctly. Sometimes people haven't had a lot of experience being an ally and they make mistakes. It's okay for people to make mistakes. Okay? It's how we respond to those mistakes that is a big difference. And that's mistakes in some senses, depending on the type of mistake, can actually in some ways be a good thing because it helps us learn and we will probably never make that mistake again. So, people are bound to mess up, and it's important that, if you're an ally who's messed up, just pause, listen, acknowledge, apologize, reflect on it, and try again. You don't have to be perfect. This is one of the things I really hate about cancel culture, as it's sort of been known by a hashtag, where someone makes a single mistake, and this particularly annoys me when it's somebody who has done a lot of good for a community and makes a mistake and is genuinely sorry and tries to apologize and make reprimands and, amends. And people are all over that person. Like, you're not doing enough. I can't believe you did this. Like, how could you have not known better? People are not infallible. Okay? The big takeaway we should be looking at is, are they sorry? Are they making amends? Are they learning? Are they trying again? Are they still trying to be a good ally? We need to let people be human to a certain extent, right? And obviously this does depend on the size of the mistake and who it impacts. And, mistakes often come with hurt feelings and so on and so forth. So, I'm not saying mistakes aren't a big deal, but how we handle them is a big deal because it can change who our allies are, what kind of allies we have in the future, and whether or not somebody continues to support, you know? Um, are we going to let people grow as people, right? And once again, that's sort of a as case by case basis, based on the type of mistake that was made and what they did after. Another common myth is that allies can't have their own problems. So everybody has problems. Being a human is hard, especially in today's age. You know, there's so many different things and we're learning all the time and things are changing all the time. And everybody has problems. So, like I said earlier, it's not about my problem is worse than yours. It's not a competition. Okay, we're not in like the misery Olympics. You know, everybody can have issues and everybody's allowed to have issues and feel how they feel about it. That being said, you know, being an ally is not about having a perfect life. You know, you can be an ally and have still experience some problems. You can be an ally and still experience other forms of oppression, but you can still be an ally for someone who has less privilege than you, right? So it's being an ally, like I said, it's about action. It's about showing up for others and being there. It doesn't mean denying your own struggles. It just means that, you know, with all the struggles you have, that you appreciate that other people have different struggles that impact them in a different way and maybe in some cases are more challenging, you know? This sort of ties into that the belief that allies can't and shouldn't share their own stories, which I don't think is correct either. I think that allies don't have to be invisible. They just need to be aware of their space. And is it an appropriate space to share your story? Or is it more appropriate to make space for someone else to share their story? And that's sort of the big piece, you know, is that context, that situational context, and having an understanding of how that works. You know, there are times when putting the focus on you takes it away from those who really do need to be centered and heard. But there's also times where sharing your story, you know, builds up mutual understanding. It can create opportunities for learning for other people. You know, you don't have to hide your story. And in fact, if you're in a space that has a lot of people who share similar privilege to you that maybe haven't thought about these things or maybe haven't talked about them before, sharing your story can be really powerful because it can actually create more allies, right? Another, and this sort of ties into what I was just sort of talking about, another myth is that allies have to remain silent, and that a good ally is only listening. As I said, you know, it's all about reading the space. You know, is it appropriate for you to share, or should you be the one listening? I don't know. I hope that makes sense. Another major one is that an ally has to sacrifice themselves for others. And that's not always true. Like I said earlier, it's not always safe for someone to stand out against injustice. I mean, we'd hope that we have the courage to and the desire to, but we also have to keep ourselves safe as well. So as an ally, you could be really generous with your privilege, and you can make it easier for other people who don't share that privilege to get the same things that you have. And, you know, helping people is incredibly rewarding. So there's lots of good reason to do that. But an ally is not automatically a martyr. People do not need to martyr themselves. If somebody chooses to, that, you know, if they feel it's appropriate, that's their choice. I hope it works out for you. I hope that whatever you're trying to achieve by being a martyr, you know, isn't a wasted effort. But a good ally is just really about helping pave that way towards equality, right? And speaking out against oppression. It doesn't automatically have to be, you know, sacrificing everything that you are and everything that you have for everyone else. Another one is that allies can only help people who have less privilege. And this sort of, I know I've sort of talked about this a little bit throughout this entire time, but you can help someone who has equal or potentially even more privilege than you understand the struggles of minorities or people who have experienced oppression. And that sort of ties back into the, creating more allies, sharing your story. You don't have to only try to help people who are in a position of less privilege than you. That is just one way to be an ally. And another way to be an ally is to use all of your privilege in the best way possible by making other people who would not listen to those minorities listen, which is an pretty important piece. So, there's also a thought that a lot of people have to be ashamed of their privilege. And I also would disagree with that. People should not be ashamed of their privilege. You just have to acknowledge that it exists. People don't fight against oppression because they hate, good times and having fun and indulging or enjoyment or any of the things that their privilege may give them. They fight oppression because it hurts other people, and it stops people from having far more, things that everybody should have, like basic rights and safety. And I don't think there's anything wrong with an ally enjoying what they have and appreciating what they have and realizing what they have access to. You don't have to be ashamed of those things. You just need to be aware of them and aware of how it impacts other people. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or questions. I know I kind of burned through that really quick. I kind of got on a roll and was talking for quite a while. No thoughts or questions? We're almost out of time, but I'm going to cover a couple more since everybody else is pretty quiet. So the other thing is that there's a common myth that allies are immune to criticism. And being an ally is not a shield from, messing up, like making mistakes like we talked about. And it's not a shield against being called out on those mistakes. A bad ally can actually do a lot more harm than good. So we should be aware of what actions our allies are taking and what actions we are taking as an ally, and make sure that it's consistent with, what we're trying to achieve. Because even good allies who have really good intentions can screw up, and it can also be hard to take that criticism that they screwed up, especially if it's something they're super passionate about. Nobody's immune to criticism is basically, and that's okay. And we sort of talked about that a little bit already with, what happens when you mess up. Apologize, recenter, keep going, right? As much as you can. So I think those are most of the things I wanted to chat about when it comes to being an ally. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions or stories that they want to share about being an ally, or maybe someone who has been an ally for them? Or if you have any questions about context of being an ally? Like I said, I think with everything that's happening right now, this is a really important conversation for people to be having and for people to be thinking about. All right, well, I guess that's we'll move into our final thoughts for the day. So thank you everybody for joining me for this episode on being an ally. Please share, please follow or subscribe or tell somebody about it, get them to subscribe. Makes a big difference to getting the word out about this live podcast. We will be live again tomorrow. That's June 5th, 8 p.m. Pacific time, 11 p.m. Eastern. And if you're looking for more information about sex or sexuality, please check out my website, exploresextalk.com. Whole bunch of resources out there. Lots of different articles on a variety of topics related to sex and relationships. And if you're looking for that little bit extra, take your relationships to the next level, please check out their Sexy Hero Society, which is my online membership portal. It's $20 a month and gives you access to tons of extra content like relationship challenges and research reviews and coloring pages and games and sex positions and sex tips and all sorts of crazy awesomeness. So yeah, please check that out. And once again, share. Thanks so much for everybody for joining me and everybody who's tuned in today. I hope you guys have a fantastic evening, and I will see you all tomorrow.